Alright, today we're going to talk about the last chapter in the book. I know, woohoo, yay, schools, media, and culture. Um, I think it's a shame that they sort of stuck culture at the back of the back of the very last chapter as like an afterthought. Um, it's a shame. It deserves much more than that. But it is what it is. You got to work with what you got. So we'll talk about school. School is very important, obviously, to a child. Children spend a lot of time in school. 179 days per year is the average. If there's 365 days in a year, that's slightly less than half a year. The high in Texas is 187 days. The high around the nation is in Texas, which surprises me because I swear to God, it feels like they take my kids out of school every week. There's an excuse to or a half day or some shit like that. Just I pay my property tax, take my damn children. All right, whatever. So that works out to about 1,250 hours a year, 15,000 hours for first through 12th grade. So hopefully there's something there. And obviously, parents worry a lot about the quality of the schools. Okay. Um, Quality of schools is the number one thing. When I went to buy my house, there was a lot of considerations I had. I wanted this, I wanted that. There were certain things I wanted in my house, but one of the things that was uncompromisable was the quality of the school district. So it turns out that the value of my house rises and falls with the results on the STARS tests. Okay, if my kid's school is commendable or commended or I don't even what is it academically acceptable or there's academically unacceptable, academically acceptable. There's something and then some. I don't know. There's four of them, whatever they are, four exceptional or something. And it's very interesting that my school district. Well, they rate both the schools themselves, the individual schools, and the school districts. Okay, and I'm in the Keller School District here, and it's a good school district. It's commended. I don't know, whatever. It's not the top, but it's the second one. Um, every year, the school, each individual school gets a rating every year, and then they can keep their rating or whatever. And the only reason that my school district is not in the top, and this is craziness. Are you ready? The reason that it doesn't have the top ranking is because um, one of the things that they have to do is prove to provide evidence to the state of Texas on graduation rates. That is to say, if a kid starts high school in ninth grade, what percentage of them graduate? In order for a school district to have the highest ranking, you have to have a particular percentage. And my school district came just that close to the graduation requirement that they needed, and the school district was desperately trying to find this one girl that started high school here in Keller area, the Keller School District, and then moved out to like Oregon or something, moved to a different state, and therefore they couldn't document whether or not this girl actually graduated from high school, and the fact that they couldn't find this girl was the thing that knocked them out and made the rating fall, the rating for the whole district fall, and therefore the value of my house plummets 10% because that they couldn't find that one girl that went over to another city. I mean, is this silly? This is just idiotic, okay? I understand you need to be worried about your kid's school. However, here's the key. The reason that school districts tend to be good is because parents tend to be searching for it. And if parents are searching for a good school district, that means they're giving their kids things at home. They're providing their children with this education is important. So what's happening is that the good school districts tend to be getting the good students stuck into them. Those students whose parents are in fact involved and interested in and value education. So it's not necessarily. I believe this at universities too. It's not necessarily that the districts themselves or even colleges are necessarily good colleges, so much as they tend to get the better students to start with. All right. The early environment for some children places them at risk for academic and social problems. Clearly, we talked about preschool in another one and about how expensive it was, and it's these programs that really prepare them. And as I had said the last time, I feel a little bad because of how expensive preschool is, and I was able to provide my children with a fairly decent preschool education, and it put them at a head start compared to other children. Well, there's been some other programs put together. The most famous was called Project Head Start, and here it's a little interesting story. It went like this: they took these kids in Project Head Start. They took basically they noted the children that came from poor families that didn't have enough uh, things. In fact, here's an interesting experiment. First, here's an experiment where you take, in this case, rats, right? And you take the rats, and as soon as they're weaned, I mean, I did some research on this for my master's thesis. As soon as the rats are weaned, you put them into two different environments. One called an enriched environment, one called an impoverished environment. The impoverished environment, by the way, is essentially nothing more than standard laboratory conditions. The rats are housed in separate cages separate by themselves, whatever, housed by themselves with very little stimulation of any kind, just a square cage. In the enriched environment, what happens is these rats are housed in groups, and they're given access to toys to play with. They're allowed to interact with each other, so they have quite a few different stimulating things going on. Then you wait for, I want to say 30 days. And it's an interesting thing, by the way. You have to be careful. You want to increase the amount of enrichment that you give them and how long you leave them in these environments. But at the same time, these rats are able to have baby rats very, very quickly because that's how rats work. And so you have to pull them out real fast. You can only leave them in there about 30 days before they get to the age, 30 days after weaning. So they're now about 60 days old. And at 60 days old, they're ready to have baby rats. And you're going, oh no, dude, I do not want thousands of baby rats. So you gotta chop that experiment off in a hurry. Well, after you raise them in those environments for 30 days, it turns out those rats that are in the enriched environment, they have a lot of different physiological differences in their brains. Literally their brain weighs more. Their brain, it occupies more space. The number of synapses, remember the connections between neurons, the number of synapses is higher. The amount of blood that flows in, the number of capillaries in there, it's just everything about the brains are bigger. But perhaps even more importantly, behaviorally, those rats that are raised in an enriched environment are smart rats, whatever a smart rat might be, right? Smart rats are ones that can solve mazes faster. Smart rats are ones that display problem-solving abilities. All kinds of wonderful things. Whereas the impoverished rats raised in the impoverished environment come out to be the dumb rats, right? So now, flash this forward. This was actually the original research done on this was done in the late 50s, early 60s, and some politicians saw this and said, that impoverished environment, that really resembles the way some of these poor children are raised. They're raised in no excitement, no stimulation, no toys, they don't have, cello lessons and summer program. They don't have any of these things that the rich kids have. And so what happened was a politician came up with the idea of something called Project Head Start, which is this notion that these children that are failing out of our high schools are those that just didn't have what they needed. They weren't ready for kindergarten. How about that? And so it was literally a free preschool program for impoverished children with the goal of setting them so that when they got into kindergarten, the impoverished children had a head start. They had a leg up, or that they were starting at an even pace with these rich children. And it was very interesting, by the way. Project Head Start was very interesting because where am I here? Yeah, Project Head Start was very interesting because in kindergarten, it was amazing. I mean, the rich kids and the poor kids, they were on target. They were at the same level, and I was like, oh my God, we've gotten rid of all of the racial differences in scores and money. What am I trying to? Socioeconomic differences in scores. We got rid of it. It's taken care of. But in first grade, if this is where they were in kindergarten, they were on equal par. By first grade, here was the poor kids. Here was the rich kids. By second grade, here's the poor kids, here's the rich kids. By third grade, and the gap just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And it doesn't surprise us when we think about it because, of course, let's say, for example, between kindergarten and first grade, there's this thing called summer. And those kids that are in a poor house, though they did okay in kindergarten, now have a summer, 3 months, where nothing happens. Whereas the rich kids probably have summer camps and band lessons, and God only knows. I mean, I send my children to Tarrant County College for Kids program, right? I mean, it's all of this stuff which is making them improve, and so all of a sudden. What happens is that these differences, and so these politicians looked at this Project Head Start and said, okay, wait a minute, if I could just give the poor kids a 1 year free preschool program, and that put them on track, that would be awesome. I would do that for every kid, and we would graduate. Our graduation rates would shoot through the roof. Everybody would be happy. But literally, what this implies is that you would need to give them intervention every single year from preschool all the way up to high school. And all of a sudden, you're talking a 13-year commitment, and the politicians could not swallow the bill that would be involved, the cost that would be involved in a 13-year intervention. Wow. So Project Head Start was sort of a dismal failure. It wasn't a failure per se, but it was not nearly as wonderful as people first thought. But other programs were created, like the ABADarian Project in particular. I looked that one up a little bit on the internet over on my other computer here, so so I can cheat. The ABADarian Project was in North Carolina, conducted in 1972. They took children. Yeah. It was inspired because the other ones sucked. They took 111 infants born between 72 and 77. 57 were given high-quality intervention, and 54 were controls. And the control group, however, was given nutritional supplements and all these other things so that later on nobody could claim, hey, the kids in the preschool program just had better nutrition. That's why they... And so, oh, no. Okay. So they wanted to make sure, like a good experiment should, that the only difference between the experimental and the control group is the one thing, the manipulation, in this case, the preschool program. And so they gave these kids intensive, just absolutely intensive programs starting when they were... all the children, by the way, were what they called at risk. They were, we know what at-risk children are. We've seen it. They were born in poverty. Perhaps they were born to unwed parents. Perhaps born to parents that were too young, or not too young, but that were young and therefore didn't have all of the resources required. So all of the kids were at risk, and then what they did was they gave them the participants received childcare for 6 to 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Wow, we're talking full time, 40 hours a week. Educational activities were game-based and emphasized language. The control group was provided with, oh yeah, we said that already. All the infants were identified as high risk. We said that. But here's the thing: they provided this intensive program, 40 hours a week, 40 hours a week, whatever, 40 hours a week for 5 years, okay? And this is a big bill to pay. Now, if you're only talking about 54 children, it's a bill that you can swallow. But if you're talking about all of the children in America, this is just more than a politician is willing to put on the line, okay? But here's what happens, is that if you do give them this intense training, they measured the children at ages 3, 4, 5, 6 and a half, 8, 12, 15, 21, and 30. So they've been following up these kids, okay? These kids are, 2000s, okay. And so they found, what was it, really the big ones? Even at age 30, I want to point that out, because now we have been talking, Project Head Start was not a failure in kindergarten, it was a failure long term. So let's look at this long term. At age 30, those kids that participated in the program were 4 times more likely to have graduated from a 4-year college. Okay, so they were much more likely to have actually finished college if they went through this program compared to. Remember, these are all at-risk children. Therefore, the percent graduating college is probably pretty low to start with, but 4 times likely. They're more likely to have been employed consistently over the previous 2 years. 5 times less likely to have used public assistance in the previous 7 years. And they delayed becoming parents by almost 2 years. Okay? And these are all significant differences. So we as a society need to look at this and say, okay, now here's the deal. These at-risk children that do not get intervention, 6% graduate college by the time they're 30. If they do get intervention, 23% graduate college. Is this difference worth the amount of money that it costs to implement this program? And unfortunately, politicians, in particular in today's day and age, by the way, I mean more so than ever, but it's always been true, politicians have this very narrow time frame that if it costs money now and I don't see a payout right at this moment, I don't think so, because that's not how you get reelected. You don't get reelected based on results that happen 30 years down the road. You get reelected based on things that you can see before voting happens. So it's hard to find money for a program that doesn't pay off until way down the line. I already said a lot of this stuff, so I talked and talked and talked. I talked a lot. Yeah, look at that. Reading, math, achievement, etc. What is that one? Yeah, it doesn't really. The most important factor in producing long-term effects is direct improvement of children's cognitive abilities, which allows them to benefit from formal schooling. Okay? It doesn't necessarily mean success, but, clearly these early intervention programs are setting the groundwork. Controversy exists. Okay, this makes sense. If a kid is not ready for kindergarten, should you hold them out for a year, or is it this delaying? Is in fact the problem is they need that kindergarten. Some would argue rather than holding the kid out of kindergarten, you throw them in there anyway, and if at the end of kindergarten the kid's not ready, you put them back and make them do kindergarten a second time. That way the kids, in fact, aren't being deprived of those experiences, which in fact would help them. All right, so now here we go. Achievement motivation. It's I don't know, I'll call it a personality characteristic for a lack of a better word. It's an internal characteristic, something you carry around with you. It's a result of nature and nurture. I mean, you could get into the whole, some children are born with this motivation, some children are not, some learn motivation through interactions in their environment, some do not, etc., the way their parents things, but whatever. The degree to which a person chooses to engage in and keep trying to accomplish challenging tasks. In other words, when things get hard, do you quit? Or do you say, you know what, I enjoy challenges? And there's lots of different tests that attempt to quantify achievement motivation by, like I said, by asking simple questions like, on a scale of 1 to 10, tell me the probability. If a math problem is really hard, what is the probability you will quit the problem or something? And whatever, they'll quantify it with these types of questions. Um, uh, Attributions. Here's Social Psych 101. Attributions are beliefs children make about why they succeed or fail. Okay? And this is a very interesting idea because there's an attribution is basically, well, there's two basic sources of an attribution. By the way, okay, how about this? This is a pretty narrow definition of attribution. An attribution is an explanation. Okay, an explanation for why something happens. We attribute things all the time. All right, we see rain and we attribute the source of them to be the clouds up in the sky. I don't know, whatever. I mean, it's just an explanation for something. And so, let's say, for example, if a child succeeds or fails, they can explain why they've succeeded. Okay, that's what an attribution is about, an explanation for something that happened. So, I succeeded. Why did I succeed? Okay, and so the children can sort of attribute their success to ability, effort, luck, the difficulty of the task, or the strategies that they used. Some of these things are in your control and some are not. Okay, luck is out of your control, isn't it? That's it. So if children attribute all of their successes to luck and all of their failures to ability, the kid's going to probably walk away depressed, right? I suck. The only time I succeed is when I get lucky. Well, anyway, let's take a look at, there's two different orientations we're going to describe. A mastery orientation. Some children develop this thing called a mastery orientation in which their successes, they say, I succeeded because I worked hard, and when I failed, it was because, hey, shit happens. Okay, these children tend to be happier. They tend to have a higher self-esteem. They tend to succeed more in life because they believe that success comes from their own hard work and their own effort, and that if they succeed, the reason they succeed is because they've tried hard. My failures are my own fault. Whereas a helpless orientation, they attribute failures to their lack of ability, and successes to things such as luck. Okay, um, children that develop a helpless orientation. In fact, again, this isn't this class, but one of the very simplest explanations for, say, clinical depression is something called learned helplessness. If people get learn this general idea that their actions do not control the world, that they can't do things, then they will get this feeling of helplessness, that they're not in control. The world just shits on me and I can't stop it. As children that develop this helpless orientation are at strong risk of developing clinical depression. The children's helpless orientation and mastery orientation is clearly influenced by the way teachers and parents interact and the feedback that they give them. Yeah, there's lots of differences between the two. Yeah, teachers' beliefs are expressed in the classroom. This is actually really interesting. This is a lot of words here, but I mean, when teach. Oh, right, there was this one study. It was very interesting. They took these teachers and they pulled out like 8 kids in their class, and they said, "Look, these kids were tested during the summer, and testing revealed that these 8 kids are ready to blossom this year. So keep an eye out for that." And so during the year, at the end of the year, those 8 kids did, in fact, their achievements just right shot right out. And the crazy thing is, of course, those 8 children were just chosen randomly. They weren't. There was no test involved. They just randomly picked 8 kids, and they told the teacher that these kids. And so what happens is the teacher has some expectations on these kids, and in some subtle way, you can do better kinds of thing comes out rather. And so all of a sudden, if a kid, if the teacher thought the kid was supposed to be successful and the kid didn't do so good, maybe the teacher would say, "That's okay, you just try harder next time," and give a little bit of extra encouragement or something. And something happened, and these expectations were communicated to the children in some subtle way because the teachers didn't knowingly, I mean, they didn't know that they were doing it. Well, it related to this is this other idea that teachers, and in fact everybody believes that they can hide their emotions, but children know exactly when the teachers like or dislike them. Children know which teachers smile but don't really mean it. I mean, they know it's not a real secret, even though teachers believe that they can't. And so, yes, we can refer to that. In fact, I just did. I just explained it on the last slide. But the word for it would be a self-fulfilling prophecy. A self-fulfilling prophecy is a prediction that comes true because you believe it'll come true, and so you begin to behave in ways which make it happen. Uh, Such as such as the teachers that were told the children were going to succeed. A classroom climate is the social and the environment that what is it? I can't read it because my own picture is behind it. Isn't that silly? But I have a second computer over here, but now I gotta find it. It says on there, the social and emotional environment within a classroom, the way a classroom feels to those in it. Um, yeah, sometimes I think, and I'm sorry, education majors, but some of that stuff that you guys do where you decorate billboards and stuff, and I'm like, you go to college for that? But you know what? I can respect it. In particular, last year, my daughter went to had a teacher who apparently, I mean, she never told us anything, but apparently felt that classroom climate was a hugely important thing. And she set up an entire Western theme. She was a cowboy kind of theme, and so from day one, okay, she had a cowboy theme going on, and everything she did themed it around cowboys, and the kids got into this. They would dress for it. They had days for dress up for it, and I mean, she really had a positive classroom environment, classroom climate, which literally made the children excited to go to school or something like that. So they had more motivation, higher achievement scores and stuff. So though traditionally I've sort of dished on ed majors making the billboards, I swear I'm sorry, all right? I call it like I see it. But seriously, I saw it last year. I saw a very successful classroom climate, and I can see what some of that billboard making can become, and it was a really good thing. Whoop. Oh yeah, ability grouping. Okay, this is an interesting one, especially today in today's day and age with the No Child Left Behind Act. See, now when I was a kid, it was all ability grouping. And we still have some, in fact. But when I was a kid, it was all ability grouping. Even I can remember as early as second grade, being put into the fast reading group, and I remember that. How proud I was when I got put into the fast reading group. But I think only twice in my life was I accidentally put into the fast group. Right? The rest of the time I'm like, no, I'm sorry, this kid ain't got nothing. All right, but twice. That in eighth grade English. I don't know how I got into that one. Hell, I even won the spelling bee in my eighth grade advanced English class. Whatever. Okay. But anyway, this grouping kids by ability. We do this still to this day because now my son in his seventh grade, just was in the pre-AP, and so clearly there was a grouping of. We have a little bit in the form of what do you call the I forgot whatever. I mean, but anyway, the pre-AP classes and then AP clearly we're grouping them by ability. But the No Child Left Behind Act has really discouraged such a thing because what happens is it separates the group between the haves and the have-nots. The teachers are now they're forced to spend all of their effort bringing the bottom students up to an acceptable level rather than focusing on making the highest achieving students excel more. And that's a shame. Though I must say, see my daughter now, she's pretty bright. I mean, every parent says it, but I believe it. I believe it. And her best friend is her and her best friend are the two top kids in her class, and she laments to me that they never get paired together. Okay, that the teacher would never pair them together, and the reason is because the teacher always pairs the brighter kids with the duller kids, and therefore she says it's too bad. Her and her best friend could never work together. That's kind of sad, isn't it? I don't know, whatever. But anyway, there's something to be said about a child can master a topic by teaching it to another kid. I know this because I've tutored for many years, and I can tell you the difference between getting an A in algebra and then tutoring it for 5 years. It's incomprehensibly different. Having simply taken the course versus having taught the material repeatedly. So there's a benefit. I mean, it's not like my daughter doesn't benefit, but it is kind of a cheat the way they do that. But it's No Child Left Behind. It's totally causing that. School climate. Okay. Some schools just have a good climate. They have a lot of parental involvement. My kids' schools, again, I'm up in a pretty good school district. I go into the school. I mean, I am an uninvolved parent. I'm sorry. I do not. I pay for my PTA, but I don't go to the PTA meetings or anything. I give them my money. Say, just don't sell me any of them cookies. All right, here, take $20. But no, I'm fairly involved parent. I go in for reading. I go in for career day. I read stories. I go in for like helper during classroom parties, holiday parties, things like that. So I'm involved, and yet at the same time, compared to many of the parents, I'm uninvolved. So my kid's school, when you go in there, every day when I do go in, there is stuff. I mean, on those rare occasions when I go in for lunch, there's 100 parents in there. They're helping out in the cafeteria. They're working. I mean, they're completely involved in the school. So clearly, there's something about the school climate itself, not just each individual classroom, And we could also talk about the effects of a small class size, clearly beneficial, especially for children that are at a disadvantage to begin with. But boy, oh boy, the costs. All right, and do we have the money for that? It's like if they have to cut staff at schools, and God forbid if anybody's been listening to the news about the education in Texas, yeah, you gotta cut the budget. How are you gonna cut the budget? By reducing the number of teachers per in the classroom. All right. Children with exceptional needs require extra help beyond what is needed by peers. And again, the No Child Left Behind Act has, I mean, it's the right thing to do to help children, sure. But what happens is, let's say, for example, one child I know, he has autism and stuff. And it's very interesting. I asked his dad about how does he do on the tests, on the STAR test or something. And he goes, yeah, I think my kid might be able to pass a STAR test. I'm not sure, maybe. But you know what? He just doesn't really understand why he would care. All right? It's not that he doesn't have motivation or ability. He just doesn't understand what he's doing. I mean, what's the point? He just doesn't understand why am I being asked to do this? And so he just sort of drifts off. Okay? And unfortunately, what happens is the school gets knocked pretty hard if this kid doesn't pass his test. Remember, we talked earlier about the school rankings. And if you don't pass, if your ranking isn't high enough, then, oh my goodness, that's horrible. Okay? And so this poor kid, he gets pushed to pass his test, and wow, okay, and I got it, Kids needs extra help, but at what cost? Okay, if one kid takes up 3 hours a day from the teacher, that leaves only 4 hours a day for that teacher to deal with every other kid in the class. Okay, that I don't know if that feels right. One kid gets 3 hours, and 25 kids get 4 hours. I just don't see the math working out on this. But anyway, an individualized education plan is something which is put together for children with exceptional needs. And it is a plan which describes the services that the kids need, describes the goals. That's important. The goals that for that kid. Say, for example, it might involve a plan to protect kids from bullying, because of course all children are at risk for bullying, but children with exceptional needs are at a much, much higher risk of bullying. So it might involve something like that. But the basic rule, as in many things, is the least restrictive environment, which of course is referring to the idea that if at all possible, you should put children in with a regular classroom. Um, and I agree with that in principle, I really do. But again, at what cost? If that one teacher is spending 3 hours with one kid per day, there's something not right in that, okay? It's not right that every other kid in the classroom has to lose that much so that one kid can make it. And I mean, and just doesn't seem fair to not give that kid everything you can possibly give him, but at what cost? Because every time one kid gets something, some other kid, or in this case 24 other kids, lose something. So I don't know. I'm torn on that one, and I know it's not politically correct. Oh yeah, what is exceptional needs? Oh, receiving funding. Yeah, okay, whatever. School systems differ in different cultures. Um, Here in America, what am I saying? Math and science scores have dropped. I don't know. Time spent. No, I don't. Parental expectations and parental involvement may be the main reasons that kids are failing, because the schools are giving more and more and more, and it's just not cutting it. Okay, why is it not cutting it? Parental expectations and parental involvement. I don't know. There's huge ethnic group differences in achievement, and partly it's because of the schools that they're going to and stuff. Um, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of different things. Poverty, different dropout rates are involved in different groups. Here, for example, is score on NAEP assessment. I don't know what the NAEP assessment is. It doesn't particularly matter. It's an academic test of some kind, and we see that as kids get older, their scores improve. I mean, that's sensible because the lines are sloping up there. But you see that there's group differences between the racial groups here across every single age group. They just don't go away. Cultural incompatibility often results in a results in a curriculum that fails to awaken minority students' interest and motivation. Um, this is a big one. If parents or the culture that a child grows up in do not believe that learning a certain skill or content is important, they communicate this belief in various ways. To me, um, this difference that we see on this picture right here, the main thing that's causing this is this right here, where the culture itself or the parents are not expressing to these children that this is an important thing. They're not expressing to the children that if you want to succeed in life, education is the way to get there. And so, don't get me wrong. I mean, there's individual differences, of course there are, but there are cultural things going on. I want to say there was a very interesting couple of years back where Bill Cosby, he came out in front of the national. Bill Cosby, he's a bright guy. He's got himself a doctorate of education, and he came out and said, "Hey, the reason that this is happening, this right here, the reason this is happening is because, in particular, fathers, but parents in general, parents in general of these groups, but fathers in particular, are just not passing along to their children the importance of education. They're just not telling those kids, hey, if you want to succeed in life, this is a way to do it." Okay? And these kids are picking up on that. These kids are picking up with, this is not something important for me. This is not important for my culture. This is not important for my family. And it is that reason and that reason only that those differences occur. I mean, that's my opinion. My opinion. Okay? How can problems be prevented? Children begin school ready to learn. They experience early success. Yes, if they experience too much early failure, they will quit, they will give up, they will find school to be a very bad place. Let's say, for example, again, in my Sunday school, with my Sunday school's work, my pastor he's a good guy. He's a good guy, but he's young. He's young. And he thinks that he can make these kids between first grade and fifth grade, and he can somehow turn them into mature Christians that think in a mature manner. And I'm like, no. At this age, all you can do is set the foundation, set them up so that they're excited, so that they have positive associations with church, and that's it. You're not going to make a mature Christian out of a kid who's, let's say, 11 years old is the top age we have. There is no way you're going to make a mature Christian from an 11-year-old. Okay? Don't pretend you're going to. Your goal at that point in Sunday school is to get those kids so that they have a positive attitude about church and about religion in general, so that they are ready to absorb later on when their cognitive skills are at the level that they can be mature. That's my belief, and it's the same thing when it comes into kindergarten for children. They need to experience these positive emotions, these positive things. It's just Pavlov and his bells, the little Albert and the rat, right? You just need to have positive associations so that it just feels, going to school feels good to the kids. That's really what you need to do. They need to believe that school is relevant and important to their life. They need to believe that it's a important lesson to have. As I had told you earlier, when I was trying to teach my children to read, one of the most important things I laid out, the first things I laid out, was to convince them that it was an important skill that they would want to have, that it's a way that you can do cool things. Okay? This motivation in and of itself is by far, I mean, individual cognitive abilities and skills are important, but this motivation, this desire to learn, these positive feelings that you have about the act of learning, set the foundations for everything else. You can read these. I don't like to read these things. Feel free to read these things later. All right, children in the media. Okay, kids like to watch television. Absolutely. My kids too. They will watch television for hours and hours and hours if you don't stop them. Okay, and I admit when I was a kid, I was guilty of it too. The second most frequent use of media is audio, like music and stuff. Video games and computer games occupy less time per day at all ages than print media. I don't know what that really I guess it depends on the kid and it depends on the day of the week and stuff. But anyway, use of this stuff, it peaks by age 13 and then starts to decline. Here's a good quote from 1999. American children spend the equivalent of a full-time work week using media for non-school related purposes. Much of that time is not supervised by parents. Um, this was 1999. I suspect that children use a lot more than a full-time school week. What kinds of media are children using? This is kind of a silly picture when you really think about it because it changes so rapidly in today's technological society. Uh, Boys watch more television and play more video games than girls do. African American and Hispanic children use more media than white children, as much as 2 hours per day more. That scares the living shit out of me because we already know how much the white kids are doing. The white kids are watching way too much television. Add 2 hours to that, that scares the crap out of me. That is a lot of time spent using media. Computer use is equivalent, mostly because computers are available at school. Uh, Consistent differences between socioeconomic groups and TV use and time with print media, mostly based on access, right? However, most studies about the media have focused on the negatives, but there are some positives, like the Harry Potter phenomenon. That is to say, well, again, I'm torn. Some parents they say, hey, if you can just get your kid to read, it doesn't matter what you get him to read, it's a good thing for him. And I'm like, yeah, that's true, that's true. But if your kids are reading nothing but comic books, I mean, come on, their brain is, I mean, yeah, they're reading. All right, I'll give you that. And Harry Potter and the excitement around Harry Potter definitely inspired a generation of kids to read that would not have picked up a book otherwise. But once the book wasn't Harry Potter, I don't know. And I mean, don't get me wrong, that's important. But in truth, the reason that we need to learn to read is to function in society, not just to read a novel for entertainment. That's not, I mean, don't get me wrong, reading for entertainment is an important thing. It's a very important thing. But reading for knowledge is the reason that we need to learn to read. And so I work very hard with my children to get them to read, not just to read, but to read stuff. Like I will I pick their books. At the moment, my daughter is reading Huckleberry Finn, her choice, and my son just finished up Animal Farm, my choice. Okay, and so I'm going to give them books that are entertaining, right? Those are both entertaining books, but ones that are thinkers. And both of those books have been made into movies, and so within the next couple of weeks, I may well end up going over to the library and picking up those movies and watching them together, because the kids are very excited to read a book and then watch a movie, and then we can of course have discussions about what did they change, what was true to the book and what was changed for the movie. TV has a mixed effect on cognitive skills. Watching educational programs during preschool years and grades in high school is positively correlated, but you got to remember this is correlated, and the reason is quite simply um, the parents of educated parents are much more likely to monitor the programs their children watch and ensure that they watch certain things. Um, if you let my kids go unmonitored, they will watch iCarly all day long or some other stupid program such as that. However, we tell them, look, you're only allowed to watch off of Netflix. Watch documentary, anything from the documentary category in Netflix, and you're good to go. Okay, so does it is it the act of watching the educational programs causing the higher grades, or is it the parents that are monitoring and encouraging? Probably some of each. There's some evidence that people who watch more action television have better problem-solving skills. We call that the MacGyver effect. Anybody remember MacGyver? Probably not. Go look it up on an old 80s sitcom or something. Um, Correlation or whatever. Everything is correlational. So, quick reminder, we've done these Bobo doll things before. Remember the Bobo doll studies? They watched the woman and then they imitated the woman. Remember that? And in particular, they watched her, and if she was rewarded for the violence, they imitated her even more. And if she was punished for the violence, they imitated a little less, but it didn't even need rewards and punishments. When they watched it, they just imitated it. You remember some of that stuff? So here, by the time the average child in the U.S. leaves elementary school, he or she will have viewed more than 8,000 murders and 100,000 other violent acts on TV. And it differs from real violence because there's often no consequences. It's often portrayed as good versus evil. The violence on television is very one-sided. You see a good guy and a bad guy. There's no suffering. You don't see long-term consequences, and in fact, it's often portrayed as funny. When Bugs Bunny does it, shit, it is funny when Bugs Bunny does it, right? Yeah, whatever. Um, there's been a lot of studies showing that the amount of TV violence a kid watches at age 8 is correlated strongly of aggressive behavior at age 18. This is correlational. Again, you don't really know for a fact if 8-year-olds that are aggressive prefer, aggressive 8-year-olds prefer to watch aggressive television, and an aggressive 8-year-old turns into an aggressive 18-year-old. Or is it an 8-year-old that watches aggressive television becomes aggressive as a result of the aggression? So you can't. However, there have been lots of studies done that showed, yeah, here, by the way, the amount of TV watched and the amount of aggression and crime, and clearly they're crazy numbers. Um, yeah, but anyway, there's inevitably when it comes to the aggressive effects of short-term watching, or the effects of watching aggression on the short term, and that has been studied experimentally, not correlationally. And yes, I can tell you, when little boys, I remember when I was in one point I was doing Sunday school. I was a teacher for Sunday school for 3-year-olds, 2 and 3-year-olds, and once in a while the parents would bring in a Power Rangers video. And when those kids would watch the Power Rangers afterwards, these sweet little 3-year-old, 2-year-old boys, they were so sweet, so gentle, and they would watch the Power Rangers and they would turn into little evil bastards that just wanted to kick you in the nuts, man. They just run around, pow, pow, pow. It's like, whoa, man, I got to get my cup on, all right? And it was amazing how much violence they would exhibit after watching. So in the short run, television violence does lead to increased violence. That's a fact. Um, there are pro-social things on television too. It can act in positive ways, but television with pure pro-social content is pretty rare. This is, in fact, the finding which prompted Sesame Street in the first place, but it's pretty rare. I mean, the last time I can remember, I don't watch primetime television. I mean, none, zero. But the last time I can remember a primetime television show that had pro-social content and messages was the Cosby Show, and that was like 25 years ago now, or shit, 20 years ago now. 20 years ago, since I know of, but I don't watch those things. But, that's something else. But kids can also pick up stereotypes from TV viewing. Okay, whatever. Video games. Video games well, when I was a kid, I convinced my mother, Mom, if I play the Atari, it will improve my hand-eye coordination. All right, and I was like, oh, okay. Well, yeah, some true. But unfortunately, what happens is the majority of video games feature aggression or violent content or something like that, and I have some real problems with that, and I think I talked about them earlier, but some of these video games are just not right. I mean, Assassin's Creed or Vice City or something. I was like, they have no business put. I don't. I don't like censorship. I really don't. But I think the government needs to step in and censor some of that stuff. All right. It serves no purpose of any kind, and it's terrible because these large media companies, that produce all of this violence, they say, hey, we're just producing what sells. That's what a free market is all about. We produce products that people will purchase, and I was like, okay, I understand that, but you also have created a system where we have no choices but that violent shit. So I don't know. I mean, heavy gameplay has got some social impacts that are just being explored now. Um, there's something to it. Um, Education-oriented software can be very beneficial. this is when my kids say, "Can I play a video game?" and there's a set of there are certain games that will allow my kids to play, and certain ones that I'm not allowing them to play. They like to try to cross that border though, and they'll be like, I'll say, okay, you can go play an educational game, a strategy-based game, if the two of you, my two children, if you work together on it or something, because I'm thinking it'll help them to coordinate and everything else. And then she'll come back and say, well, can we play Plants vs. Zombies? And I'm like, okay, dude, you're just pushing it. You're just pushing it as far as you can, aren't you? Here's what you're allowed to play. And so kids are something else. Um, Children from 12 to 18 years of age report the most frequent use of internet for schoolwork, followed by entertainment and communication. But I suspect that this has something reported before Facebook. That's a strong suspicion I have. Um, Using a lot of internet is associated with loneliness. But the question is a lot of internet use creating loneliness, or is children that have poor social skills just more likely to go online? And I suspect it's the latter. Children learn unrealistic. Oh, here's an awesome quote. This is actually Barack Obama. I'm a liberal, but here's a good quote. It goes like this: We don't teach our children that healthy relationships involve drunken, naked parties in a hot tub with strangers, but that's what they see when they turn on the real world. I know it's a little dated, but when they're fed a steady diet of these depictions over and over again from the time they're very young, this behavior becomes acceptable, even normal. That was a good quote. This is way before he was president, probably way before he was senator. So there's a pretty good quote. I like that one. All right, and so finally, like I said, they stick this in on the end, and it's too bad. But culture refers to a system of shared customs and meanings that allow individuals to participate as members of a group that are transmitted from one generation to the next. There are a lot of cultural differences. However, the one that we'll focus on, because it is the biggest one and a humongous one, is the difference in individualism and collectivism. Individualism is a generically, there's no definition on here. Individualism generically is this idea. In fact, here is an individualism as an image. Individualism is this idea that I exist as an individual, that I am separate from others, that the most important thing is what's good for me, or something like that. So in this picture, the independent view of the self-image that we see here, this actually comes from Marcus and Kitayama, Hazel Marcus and some Japanese Kitayama dude. We see this idea of, you see each circle represents a person, okay? You see there's you in the middle. You are the individual in the middle. You have a friends, you have a brother, you have a mother, you have an acquaintance. But if you take a look at these circles, each circle does not overlap. None of the circles overlap with each other. You are you and they are they. You see that? There's no overlap. Um, we find that in this type of system, you exist separately from other people. You have an existence which is different from them. You take a look at that in-group, that circle for the in-group, and it's a dashed line. That is to say, people that have this more individualistic sense of self, or the way they think, their in-group, or that group of people that they connect with, it's real flexible. People can drift in and out of that in-group all of the time. An acquaintance, somebody that you know in one, when you move across the country or something, those acquaintances that were in your in-group are just going to sort of disappear the moment you go to a different place. They're just, and new ones will pop in, right? Whereas some people tend to have what they would call more of a collectivistic self, or a interdependent view of the self, as it says up here. And we see that, again, each circle represents a person. But you notice the very definition of me in the center, this yellow circle, the very definition of me overlaps with the definition of these other people. I mean, when I describe who I am, I can't help but say I am a brother. I am a son. I am a friend. And the very definition of who I am will involve these other people. So you see that the circles here to define who I am is a dashed line indicating that it's kind of fluid. It's a fluid thing. But at the same time, you look at the in-group, and you see this in-group is a solid line. Strangers do not get into the in-group, and acquaintances do not leave the in-group. Okay, once somebody's in this in-group, they're going to pretty much stay forever. Now, this is I'm trying to take this idea would dominate the entire course, the cross-cultural psychology course. The entire course would be dominated by this one concept. And here I am trying to shove it in as an afterthought at the very end of the very last chapter. So forgive me, I'm giving you what I'm giving you. Okay? Well, suffice it to say, nobody completely is independent, and nobody is completely interdependent. Each and every one of us has some degree of independence and some degree of interdependence. You could almost think about it as occurring along a continuum, with independent on one end and interdependent on the other, and everybody falls somewhere along that line. Okay? Well, it turns out here in America, we tend to, as a general rule, most people are more likely to exhibit symptoms of this independent self. In Asian cultures, and some others that I'll describe on the next slide, in, let's say, Asian cultures, the individuals in the people in that culture are more likely to exhibit an interdependent view of the self, or collectivistic view of the self. They're more likely to. That doesn't mean, and there's individual differences. Okay. But here we find this graph is a terrible graph, by the way. It is terrible. So let me describe the point of it. The point is that here in America, we are very individualistic. In other countries, in particular in Asian cultures and in Africa, they are much more collectivistic. Okay? So these are just really, it's a really bad image. Really, really bad. Okay. So, like I said, I sort of summarize that. Suffice it to say, though, this individualism and collectivism will influence so many things in a child's development, including the way they define friendship, the way they interact with family, the way, see, in an independent context, if a child grows up with this individualistic sense of self, if this context, then, say, for example, in their mind, the most important thing they can do is succeed they can be successful. If a child grows up with more of a collectivistic or an interdependent view of the self, they will believe that the most important thing that they can possibly do is take care of their family. And so we find that if two children, one individualistic and one collectivistic, and if these children are faced with this thing, okay, your mother is sick, and you have been offered a scholarship to go to college on the other side of the country. Will you go? Yes. Hell yes, I'm going to go. Will you go? No. No, I will not. And so we find that though that's a very, very, very simplified example, it tells you that almost every decision and choice that a child makes will be influenced by the way that they view this. And the way that they view this will, in fact, be influenced by the culture that they come from. All right, anyway, I was talking about poverty. Inner city poverty, it's a terrible place for kids to learn, a lot of crime, a lot of, as we said, the problem is children that grow up in the inner city, I mean, to me, again, I'm simplifying matters here, but the problem is the parents have to work perhaps two jobs, or there's many times absent parents. These parents either don't know how to express, or they're just not expressing to their children the importance of education. They don't monitor the children. They don't make sure that, they're not, and I mean, it's not that it's not that they won't or don't want to necessarily so much as they can't. I mean, they got two jobs or something. So for whatever reason, it's not happening. And these kids are just not getting what they need to give them the head start they need to get into school. Percentage living in poverty. Again, it's kind of a stupid graph, but it's relevant. Let's, in fact, just look at the all ages one, and we see that the percentage of children living in poverty is clearly different based on different races here, and we know that how poverty puts children at risk for so many different factors. So right here we see different racial groups have sort of this little handicap when it comes to just going to school in the first place. So it's a true thing here, that's for sure. It is definitely a cultural context. In rural areas, there's poverty as well, but rural poverty is different from urban poverty. Um, Most people in rural areas don't work multiple jobs. They're poor and they're poor, and that's just how they are. There tends to be stronger family loyalty, stronger social connections in rural areas. Um, it's hard to tell, but poverty is not necessarily poverty. Growing up poor is not necessarily the same in all types of poor. Acculturation. This is interesting. Some children come to America and or they have parents that belong to a different group than them. I have done a lot of work at the Korean church with this because what happens is that let's say parents they come to America, they move to America for a variety of reasons, and what happens is they come to America because they think that America will be better for their family, for their children, etc. And then what happens is they get here, and then immediately, as soon as their children begin to do something that they don't like, then all of a sudden they hate America, and so they pass along these messages to their children that their children don't know how to deal with. That is, so the children are growing up basically, am I Korean or am I an American? And it's like the parents are brought them here because they thought it would be a better place for the kids, but and I was like, okay, here's my belief on this, and I have to tell the parents this, and I do. I say, you cannot just walk in and expect to get the good things and not going to get the bad things too. You want your kids to have more freedom and not get beaten at school? Well, then in order to have that, you're also going to have children that sass you back and children that, don't bow to you or something. It all comes together. It all comes as a group. You can't have one and not the other. And so acculturation is difficult because when kids come in, they're torn. And again, this is the wrong class for it, but when I teach the cross-cultural psychology class, spend quite a bit of time on different strategies that people use for acculturating. Suffice it to say, some people completely fail to integrate into their new culture. Some completely reject their original culture. Some create a completely dual identity where at home they're one identity, one culture, and that outside the home there's something else. But often children are brought in and they're used as a cultural broker. I like that. That's interesting. They're being brought in as interpreters for the family that can't speak the language, or ones that can go out and understand how they're supposed to do stuff. And that's an awesome responsibility to put on a little kid. And I've seen it as young as 5 years old, where a little kid is like, the parents don't speak the language, and so the kid's job is to translate. But the kid is 5 years old. They don't have the cognitive ability to really understand what they're supposed to do, and so they can't really adequately explain this. And it's got to be frustrating to them. It's probably an awesome. It probably does many positive things for these kids too. But that's an awesome responsibility to dump onto a 5-year-old. And last but not least, mainstream culture changes with diversity. Yes, obviously. Culture permeates all systems that affect children directly or indirectly, in turn influencing their thoughts, emotions, beliefs, and behaviors. Yes, culture is everywhere. It influences. Cultural differences can sometimes, yes, they're different than we're deficits. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, what's the point? Okay, we know the point that we as children, this is child development, child psych, children develop in a context that has individual psychological function, that has nature and nurture, right? It has individual psychological things that the children are born with, things that they gain from their family, things that they pick up from the larger context. These are all interacting with each other. Remember, we said over and over and over, social development depends on physical development. Physical development depends on cognitive development. The cognitive development depends, and it's all you. And so throughout this thing, we've presented this chapter and this chapter and this chapter and this idea and this idea and this idea. But never forget that these are so intimately connected together into one bigger story, and that is child development. That the development of a child depends on all of these things interacting in incredibly complex ways that cannot be simplified and broken down, even though that's exactly what we did throughout this course. Whoa. Okay? Well, I hope you enjoyed this child development course, because I mean, it's a fun one. I really enjoy it. I enjoy it a lot more than I thought I would. I hope I haven't offended anybody with some of my ideas, but que sera, sera. All right. I hope to see you all in person at some point in the future, and have a good day.